Good morning, happy Sabbath once more. Again, it is a joy to be here, but not only to be here, but to also have the privilege to speak for the Lord this morning, to present His message. As we had discussed before, we know the importance of the health message, for it is the right hand of the three angels' message. So I once more want to welcome the brethren, but also those watching online. May this be a blessing to you. May the Lord teach us and give us the wisdom to take care of this wonderful machine that He had made at creation. He has given us the knowledge. We just need to follow the knowledge He has given us. Oftentimes, we are stubborn and we don't, and we see the consequences. But if we are wise and follow His advice and taking the wisdom He has given us, none of these diseases that afflicted the Egyptians would afflict us if we follow His will. I know that in the past, when we've done the health presentation, we have dealt with diseases. Then we had kind of exhausted that portion of the health message or health presentation. So this morning, we want to focus more on how we eat or what we eat. So this morning, we want to focus on the use of salt. Much has been said about salt, both from a spiritual point of view, as also as a condiment, as a food item, and how we use salt. We know that the Bible mentions salt all throughout, starting with the Old Testament. We see how it was used in the sanctuary all the way, and how Jesus often talked about being the salt of the earth. So if we go into scriptures, we read in Matthew 5:13, ye are the what? Salt. The salt of the earth. But if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden on the foot of men. So what was Jesus referring to at that time when He told us to be the salt of the earth? We could read in Review and Herald, August 22, 1899. Inspiration tells us that in His teaching, Christ likened His disciples to objects most familiar to them. So He used things that they were very familiar, some easy lessons that they would understand, something that they could relate to, and make it easy and simple that even a child could understand it. He compared them to salt and to light. Ye are the salt of the earth, He said. Ye are the light of the world. These words were spoken to a few poor, humble fishermen. Priests and rabbis were in the congregation of hearers, but these were not the ones addressed. With all their learning, with all their supposed instruction in the mysteries of the law, with all their claims of knowing God, they reveal that they knew Him not. To these leading men had been committed the oracles of God, but Christ declared them to be unsafe teachers. He said to them, ye teach for doctrine the commandment of men. Ye do err, not knowing the scriptures, nor the power of God. Turning from these men to the humble fishermen, He said, ye are the salt of the earth. So who will finish this work in the last days? Would it be the famous preachers that we see on TV? No. Would it be even within the Adventist faith, within the Advent faith, would it be the big preachers that we often run to whenever they're going to preach here, whenever they're going to preach there? I say, they're not going to finish the work? No. It is the simple layman, for they are the salt of the earth. Colossians chapter 4, verse 6, we read the following. Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that ye may know how ye ought to answer every man. Comparing to inspiration, we read in manuscript 95, 1906, we read the following. Powers of speech sanctified. As you rose from the watery grave at the time of your baptism, you professed to be dead. And you declared that your life was changed, hid with Christ in God. You claim to be dead to sin and cleansed from your heredity and your cultivated traits of evil. In going forward in the rite of baptism, you pledged yourself before God to remain dead to sin. Your mouth was to remain sanctified, a sanctified mouth. Your tongue, a converted tongue. You were to speak of God's goodness and to praise His holy name. Those you were to be a great help and a blessing to the church. So we must be that salt also in speech, a sanctified tongue, a teaching tongue. Going forward, Luke chapter 14, verses 33 through 35. So likewise, whosoever he be of you that forsaketh not all that he hath, he cannot be my disciple. Salt is good, but if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be seasoned? It is neither fit for the land, nor yet for the dunghill, but man cast it out. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. So we must dispose of all things as he called us to do, and become those simple laymen and do his work as we read previously. Yet again, Mark 9 chapter verse 50. Salt is good. But if the salt have lost its saltiness, wherewith will ye season it? Have salt in yourselves and have peace with one another. To break it down even more, let us read from the Spirit of Prophecy. The light of heaven is to be reflected through Christ's followers to the world. This is the Christian's life work, to direct the minds of sinners to God. The Christian's life should awaken in the hearts of worldlings high and elevated views of purity of the Christian religion. This will make believers the salt of the earth, the saving power in our world. For a well-developed Christian character is harmonious in all parts. So we need that salt that the Lord spoke about. Continuing, Gospel Workers 92, page 45.1. The minister of Christ, who is imbued with the spirit and love of his master, will so labor that the character of God and his dear Son may manifest in the fullest and clearest manner. He will strive to have his hearers become intelligent in their conceptions of the character of God, that his glory may be acknowledged on the earth. A man is no sooner converted than in his heart is born to the desire to make known to others what a precious friend he has found in Jesus. The saving and sanctified truth cannot be shut up in his heart. The Spirit of Christ illuminating the soul is represented by light, which dispels darkness. It is compared to what? To salt, because it is preserving qualities, and to leaven, which secretly exerts its transforming power. So we know that salt, in a physical point of view, has different aspects of different things that it does. We know that it's often used for seasoning, for flavor. We know, as in this case, it's used for preservation, to preserve, as a preservativist. So likewise, we are to preserve those that are out there, protect them, bring them the word of God. And we also know that in previous times, in ancient times, there was physical coins and money, but also oftentimes what was used as a form to pay wages? Salt. Those we get the word salary from, when in those times the wages were paid with salt, those salary. So we see the different attributes of salt. Thoughts from the Mount of Blessing, page 36. Salt must be mingled with the substance to which it is added. It must penetrate and infuse in order to preserve. So it is through personal contact and association that men are reached by the saving power of the gospel. They are not saved in masses, but as individuals. Personal influence is the power. We must come close to those whom we desire to benefit. Again, we must preserve those that are coming into the Lord, those that are with teaching. We must help them along. And we must come close when we decide that benefits. Well, we do get a benefit when we teach others. As we teach others and come close to others, our characters come closer to the character of Christ. So, therefore, we must have that spiritual salt. But in the physical form, what is salt? As we see it on our tables, on the salt shaker, that as we use it as a condiment, what is salt? It's been around for millennia, in other words, thousands of years. Even a part of our tongue is God created it to taste salt. Even though this substance is also known as sodium chloride, we often refer to salt as sodium, but sodium, as we use it as a condiment, is a combination of both sodium and chloride. It has been around for such a long time, and it continues to be an important part of our diets today. But as a result of our bad habits and our overconsumption, salt has come to have a bad reputation. But salt has its benefits, as we will see as we move along. Oftentimes, God has given us good things, but we abuse it. We do not follow the counsel to do everything in moderation. The enemy has taught us otherwise, to take something good and he turns it into what? Into something bad. But that was not the intention. Now the question is asked, is avoiding salt dangerous? We know there are those who hear the reputation of salt, how bad it is for your health, high blood pressure and so forth, and they decide to all together, let's get rid of salt. Is that a wise counsel? No, it's not. And we will see why. And for those at home, I wish I could show you the slides at the moment, but we'll discuss them in depth so you get a full understanding of what we're presenting through the slides. As we see in the picture, salt is good. Salt has amazing health benefits. Among those, healthy for digestion. It facilitates body movement. It supports heart health. Oftentimes we think the opposite, that it's bad for the heart because of high blood pressure. But in reality, it is good for the heart. It helps prevent iodine deficiency. It is important for rehydration. Again, oftentimes we think the opposite, that we get dehydrated if we take too much salt. But it is essential for rehydration. It helps reduce the risk of diabetes. It promotes good oral health. Improves the respiratory system. It decreases appetite. It helps remove toxins. It supports normal blood pressure. If taken properly, it helps support blood pressure, not increase it. It helps maintain a normal blood pH. And we'll go into those individually and see why. As we read in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 9, page 162, Inspiration tells us, food should be prepared in such a way that it will be appetizing as well as nourishing. It should not be robbed of that which the system needs. I use some salt, and always have, because salt, instead of being deleterious, is actually essential for the blood. In Counsels of Diet and Health, page 344, the counsel is given. At one time, doctor tried to teach our family to cook according to the health reform at that time, as he viewed it, without salt or anything else to season the food. The doctor thought that it was a wise idea not to use salt and to avoid it altogether and not suffer the diseases of overconsumption of salt. But he was wrong. Well, I determined to try it, but I became so reduced in strength that I had to make a change. So instead of her health improving, it deteriorated. It got worse. And a different policy was entered upon with great success. I tell you this because I know that you're in positive danger. She's giving advice to somebody. Food should be prepared in such a way that it will be nourishing. It should not be robbed of that which the system needs. And we will see the importance of sodium and sodium chloride in the system later on. I use some salt and always have, because from the light given me by God, this article in the place of being deleterious, is actually essential for the blood. So again, we see the importance of salt for the blood. And finally, I don't know how many of the brethren remember the story of what happened with Minister Loveborrows and his family when they also decided to cut salt from their diet. We saw the result. This is her writing a letter to Brother Loveborrows and his family explaining the situation. He says, now I wish to tell you something, what the Lord has shown me in my own case and a score of others in reference to diet. Some years ago, Elder Loveborrow's family were living very much as you have been. She's giving advice to somebody. She's using the example of Elder Loveborrow. Discarding salt and rigidly following a certain course they have marked out. All were dyspeptic. What is dyspeptic? Pastor Walker, what is dyspeptic? Digestion system, right? When you get heartburn and burp, that kind of stuff is this. You're suffering from dyspepsia. This is even dyspeptic. Elder Loveborrow did not have strength to perform his ministerial labors, and the children ate double the amount of food they should have had because the wants of the stomach were not met. So here we have an elder of the church, one of the pioneers, not doing the work for the Lord because he was lacking salt and he did not have the strength. His body was lacking. And also we see the example of the children who their body was lacking something. Children are developing, they're growing. It is essential that children get all the nutrients that they need. And their body knew that it was lacking something, so as a result, they felt hungry all the time. So instead of eating a normal portion, they were eating twice as much. But still, they were not getting what the body needed. I was shown that the ideas that they had received in regard to diet were not to be carried out as they had been. All ate largely and yet were unsatisfied. Not only the children, the whole family were in the same situation. They ate a great amount, but yet not satisfied. Nature, I saw, had a heavy tax upon her, and yet was not nourished. I have no time now to state all the particulars, but I was shown that death would be the result unless a change was brought about at once. So we see here, not only was sickness coming on, but also they were in danger of getting worse and worse all the way up to death. But Elder Loveborrow's wife was possessed of conscientiousness that was painful, and an infliction to herself and all connected with her. Sick and suffering as she was, her conscience, which certainly could not have been a sanctified conscience, held her to extreme course she had adopted. I was shown that the Lord would have them study from the cause to effect and see that it was best to break up a routine in which the system was not nourished. It was a mistake to discard salt altogether as they had done. It would be better for them to use it moderately, moderation. So see here how the enemy works. Either he wants us to give us too much of something to destroy us, and we hear that, and we go to the other extreme, and we suffer as well. Instead of following moderation down the middle, we go to extremes. Now we're going to go into more details, the benefits of salt. We went through the list a few moments ago. Now we're going to go one by one and explain why it affects all those different organs and all those different aspects of the body and our health. Again, salt is integrally involved in digestion. As we have spoke before, we know we're familiar with that the main acid or component in our stomach that helps digest is what? Hydrochloric acid. And as we could deduct from the word itself, it's a combination of two words. It's a combination of two different ions, hydrogen and chlorine. And then, as I stated earlier, the salt we have on our tables is not sodium alone. It is sodium chloride. So again, hydrochloric acid has a combination of hydrogen and chloride. So when we take the salt we use for consumption, that part of it, the chloride, is helping develop that hydrochloride that we need for digestion. So that's one of the key components of digestion, chloride. So there we see the importance of taking salt and consuming salt. Though it rarely occurs, deficiency of salt would inhibit digestion as a side effect. So if we don't have enough salt in our system, we inhibit digestion. And again, we spoke about how it is good for the heart. Often we hear the opposite, how it is bad for the heart because of high blood pressure. But we need salt for the heart to work. For we know that the heart has its own pacemakers cells. Oftentimes we have those that suffer from heart disease or their heart is not working properly. So what do they get, especially in older age? They get a pacemaker to keep the heart beating at a proper rate and working properly. But naturally, when God made us, he made a natural pacemaker for the heart. And it's those pacemaking cells that work in pumping the heart at its proper time. There are things beyond them which control their function. For example, sodium ions help in the transmission of electrical impulses. So these cells are stimulated to transmit signals to cardiac cells to beat. So sodium is key in communicating with those cells to send that electrical impulse, letting the heart to know that it's time to beat. Though it shares the responsibility with potassium ions, its importance cannot be overlooked. So I know in the past, when we have different presentations, we spoke about the importance of both sodium and potassium. Pretty much all electrolytes are important. Sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, and magnesium. But the two most important ones are potassium and sodium, because they are key components of how our cells operate. It is a balance between potassium and sodium that even in the most minute part of our body, which is the cells, those two are very essential in the functioning of the cells. And in this case, in the functioning of those pacemaking cells of the heart. It is necessary to facilitate body movement. In similar manner to the heart, but much more directly, sodium helps propagate the transmission of electrical impulses from the nerves to the muscles. So again, sodium helps send that message from our nerves into our muscles to make movement. We know that the brain through the nerves sends that message to our body for us to move. So, it's that electrical impulse, through the nerve is sent, and finally it communicates with the muscle, and we move our body parts. But sodium plays a key role in making that happen. So again, here we see how the proper intake of salt is important for our body function. We saw that, as we saw in the story of Elder Loughborough, he was weak. He didn't have the energy. Obviously, if he was weak, his muscles were not working properly because he was not getting that salt that he needed. It helps prevent iodine deficiency. Now, naturally, the salt that we consume doesn't come with iodine, but oftentimes it's fortified with iodine. So where iodine is not part of salt, today is basically standard fare for all table salt produced to be enriched with iodine, solving a major problem afflicting a large population of the world. It says poorer countries especially may not have a luxury of iodized salt and find themselves deficient in this important micromineral. Iodine plays an important role in metabolism and healthy cellular function, also being important to pregnant mothers in order to ensure the health brain development of the unborn child. So not only is it important for us, but for the pregnant mother, the iodine is key in the brain development of the child that's within her womb. So as I stated, even though iodine is not naturally a part of sodium chloride, but oftentimes most of the salt that we consume at our table, it is fortified with iodine. And again, rehydration. It seems to be a contradiction of what we are still hearing, that if we consume too much salt, we get thirsty, so we need to be hydrated. But salt is actually good for rehydration. It says rehydration does not merely involve drinking water, but also the mineral salts that regulate electrolyte balance. When we sweat, we lose water and electrolytes. So we must ensure that we rehydrate with an ideally isotonic solution of sodium, magnesium, and potassium ions along with water. Use of water alone would cause a scenario known as water intoxication. So as we see, sodium chloride is two of those electrolytes that are very common in our body that we need. So as we sweat out and use energy, we lose those electrolytes as we started out. That's why oftentimes you see a lot of athletes, they give them drinks that are rich in electrolytes to replenish everything that they're losing through the sweat of activity. Oftentimes we hear about Gatorade, and that's basically what Gatorade is. It's rich in all these electrolytes. It's not good in the sense that it might have too much sugar, but that, there's other drinks similar to Gatorade that might not have as much sugar. Like I know the children, they give them Pedialyte when they have diarrhea and so forth, and they have exerted all their electrolytes, and it's good to replenish all those electrolytes that we need. Now again, the key ones, as I stated earlier, potassium and sodium, which we get from salt. It is also necessary for normal blood pressure. Again, it seems like another contradiction. For often we hear, stay away from salt if you want to have good blood pressure. But he says, while it's true that high intakes of salt negatively affect blood pressure, you will be wrong to think that we can absolutely remove it from our diet. It says electrolyte balance needs to be maintained via the consumption of both sodium and potassium-rich foods. Using table salt in your meals while keeping an eye on your intake, obviously moderation, it is the best way to regulate blood pressure. So again, we need that balance. We need those electrolytes. We need that sodium. We need that potassium once more to regulate the system. Most of our body, like I said, even from the most minute part of it, which is the human cell, they all work intricately with potassium and sodium. All the electrolytes, but those two more specifically. So in every aspect of our body, we need to have that balance, and we need that sodium, so we need that salt. And again, also the other component of table salt, chloride, which is another electrolyte. It helps reduce the risk of diabetes. Since many people do not know, but sodium plays an important role in maintaining the sensitivity of insulin towards blood glucose. So salt, again, is connected with controlling insulin in the body, which controls our glucose level in the blood. In addition to magnesium, sodium also helps to ensure that insulin functions as intended and clears glucose in a timely manner. So again, we need to have a right amount, a moderate intake of salt in order to help clear the glucose from our bodies. So diabetics who might have high glucose levels or high sugar levels, they might have possibly look into their consumption of salt, make sure they're getting the right amount of salt in order to help the insulin of the body do its natural work. And again, it's also good for oral health. It says a salt water gargle is one of the simplest remedies for maintaining good oral health. So when we gargle salt water, oftentimes we use it when we have a sore throat and we have a cold, to help relieve that irritation of the throat. But it's not only good for the throat, it's also for oral hygiene. It says it's able to clear excessive bacteria from the mouth and reducing the impact they have on health. Salt water gargles can be used in managing strep throat, when we have that sore throat, canker sore, those little white dots that we get inside, sometimes our gums that are real hurtful and real bothersome, and it just irritates us, as well as reducing the likelihood of developing gingivitis. So again, it also keeps our gums clean. It gets rid of all that bacteria in our gums, and it helps prevent gingivitis, which is the inflammation of the gums, as well as reducing the likelihood of developing gingivitis, as we stated, and for managing toothaches. Some toothpaste even use salt as an ingredient for whitening, since micronized size molecules can help to whiten the teeth. So also using toothpaste to help whiten our teeth. Again, another area in which salt is essential is within our respiratory system. Salt is a unique compound that possesses antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, and mucolytic properties, which helps promote the health of our respiratory system significantly. So Again, it functions as anti-inflammatory, and it also acts as antibacterial to help get rid of those bacteria that might develop into something on our lungs and leading to, eventually, if we don't take care of it, to pneumonia. And it also helps break up the mucus. It's a mucolytic to break up that mucus, and so we can expel it and get rid of it. It can also decrease your appetite. As we saw with Elder Lothwell's family, that they were overeating. The children were eating twice, the portion that should have been eating, or the whole family was overeating because they felt that, they needed to eat. The body was asking for food because it felt it was lacking something, and it was looking for that sodium, and they were not giving it. So they constantly felt like they needed to eat. It says there is evidence that shows that the flavor we are yearning for can help suppress your appetite once supplied. Case in point, there are times that you crave something salty or something sweet on the flip side. These cravings are usually met with junk food. Oftentimes, what would people do when they feel like they have cravings or they want a snack or eat something? What do? They turn to potato chips, they turn to cookies, whatever it may be. They turn to junk food. But why they're feeling that hunger is because the body wants something. It's looking for something that it needs. But instead, they eat this junk food, which gives them much calories instead of what is needed. It is believed that our various cravings are reflective of a nutrient need we have on our cellular level. So down to the cellular level, we might be lacking that sodium. So that's why we have that craving to eat. Just like in the example of Dr. Elder Lothwell's family, they were lacking sodium, so they feel always that hunger, that desire to eat. Because all the way down to their, to the cellular level, they were lacking salt, and the body was crying out for it. And also, it's a good exfoliant properties. Oftentimes how we like to play with the sand, with something that's smooth and fine to help get rid of those dead cells and, again, smooth out our skin and make our skin nice and smooth. We could use salt as well. So if you're looking for an effective, cheap, and eco-friendly exfoliating scrub that can clear your pores and help prevent pimples, thanks to the antibacterial nature of salt, it achieves two things by removing debris from cells and killing bacteria. So it's also good it's good for the skin. You could use it as an exfoliant for the skin, and it's not going to cost you much. Another way that we can use salt is to remove toxins. And the way we do that, oftentimes, we grab a basin with warm water and put salt in there. We'll see the result. It has been shown that soaking your feet in salt water solution for a period of time, it is quickly, and this method is quickly catching on as a health trend. It shows that it removes toxins. It says, as toxins appear to diffuse from the blood to the salt solution that you're using as a soak, the salt water mixture allegedly becomes very nasty after a period of time, and it's indicative of the potential of this treatment. So as you use the water and you put your feet in that salty water, you'll see the result. That's the water just gets dirtier. And it's evidence that there's some toxins that the body's getting rid of. So it's coming out through the feet in that solution. So that's another method to use salt, another way to use salt for our benefit. Again, also helps maintain that proper pH balance. Now we know here all this big crave or this big movement towards, alkaline water and so forth, and trying to go this way or that way. But sodium is very good also in keeping that proper pH balance. We don't want to go from one extreme to the next again. We want to stay at the proper level, which is the middle, a pH of 7. We're going to want to hang around that area in the center. And as we can see in the picture here, we see the different ingredients and where they lie in the pH scale. And what's right in the middle? Water. And also, sodium will help us get to that middle point. It says salt is naturally of a neutral pH, which is what our bodies are ideally looking for. So our body wants to gravitate, and our body naturally wants to stay in that balanced pH level. Though our normal pH is slightly alkaline, consumption of many neutral foods help maintain the balance. This is important to the brain as well, as small alterations to pH could be lethal. So if we don't have the proper balance, our brains could suffer, leading up to death. So we want to keep that balance, down somewhere that closer to the middle to that pH of 7, which sodium helps reach that point because it's neutral. It also helps normalize cholesterol. Since research has found that diets too low in salt correspond to highest levels of blood lipid dysfunction, indicating another important function of it. Too low salt consumption is noteworthy in increasing levels of bad cholesterol, LDL, and triglycerides. So we know that we have different kind of cholesterol. We have good cholesterol and we have bad cholesterol, which is more known as LDL. And the easiest way to remember that first L, just remember lousy. So we know that the bad cholesterol is LDL. So if we consume too little of salt, then those LDL cholesterol would increase. So we need that proper balance of salt in order to decrease that bad cholesterol and keep the good cholesterol. And also for those that suffer from eczema and other skin conditions, salt is very good. It says a salt paste can be used to relieve inflammation and itching associated with conditions such as eczema and psoriasis. It can also be applied to wounds to discourage infection with bacteria. So again, we saw that how it has antibacterial proponents to it. So whenever if we have a cut, we could use salt to prevent the development of bacteria in that wound. And also for those that suffer from eczema, which we mostly see it in children, or psoriasis, which we mostly see in adults, it helps assist in relieving those diseases as well. So we see all the positive attributes of salt. So why all the negativity, all the media, all everything that we read when we go to the doctor, how bad salt is for us, and how negative it could be, onto our health. So now we'll review as to why salt has become such a negative thing in the media, and also in our health. And again, it's lack of moderation, too much salt. Instead of staying in the middle, as we stated before, or staying away from having, eating no salt at all, others go to the next extreme, which they consume too much salt. Here are some facts. It says the average American takes in more than 3,400 milligrams of sodium each day, more than twice the ideal amount for health, according to the American Heart Association. So what do? We take twice as much as what is recommended, as what the body needs. It says studies link excess sodium intake to the development of elevated blood pressure, as we know, which increases the risk of heart attacks, strokes, and kidney disease. So we take too much salt, it leads to high blood pressure. We have high blood pressure now. Our hearts is suffering, our kidneys are suffering, and also our brains are suffering. So we could suffer from a stroke, we could suffer from a heart attack, or kidney failure. Of children ages 1 through 18, so minors, kids from age 1 through 18, listen children, it says 93% consume too much sodium, putting them at risk for developing heart disease and elevated blood pressure at an early age. So high blood pressure is not necessarily an adult condition. It could be a children condition as well. And it could develop early. As it says, 93% of our children are over-consuming salt. So oftentimes, when we go to this Asian restaurant and they have soy sauce, I know Salia likes to, like soy sauce, so we kind of always try to keep her away from her. Because something like that is high, very, 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 very high in sodium and salt. That's why, children like it and people like it. It has that saltiness and to them it tastes good, but it's very high in salt. It says 9 in 10 Americans, so 90% of Americans eat more sodium than is recommended for a healthy diet. Sodium is ubiquitous in the environment and found in many unsuspecting foods at levels that are often unnecessary. Consuming too much sodium in the foods we eat is strongly linked to the development and worsening of high blood pressure, as we stated, with increased risk of kidney disease, stroke, and heart disease. 1/3 of American adults have high blood pressure. So about 33% of the population suffer from high blood pressure. And about 90% of American adults are expected to develop high blood pressure at some point in their lives. So 33% right now are suffering, and the percentage go up to 90%. So 90% of Americans will suffer from high blood pressure at some point in their lives. So we see the condition in which we're facing, and how vast this condition and how bad it is, things are in this country for the diet that we have been basically trained to eat. When we go out and eat, we develop this taste, and our taste buds develop the desire to eat this kind of foods, and we crave it and we want it because we have gotten used to eating that way. It's an epidemic in this country. Healthcare savings. So it's been found through studies that if we were to cut our consumption of salt to half of what we on average consume, which is twice as much, if we were to cut down to 1,500 milligrams a day instead of the 1,300 we were over-consuming, there'll be about a saving of $26 billion in healthcare in this country. So because we overconsume salt, not only are we suffering, but our economy is also suffering. It says the prevalence of high blood pressure in African American adults in the U.S. is 40%, among the highest in the world. So among African American, it was 33% for the overall population, but when we focus on African Americans, it's 40%, and if we compare to the rest of the world, it is the highest in the world. It says African Americans have almost twice the risk of first ever stroke compared to with the white counterparts. And when it comes to Hispanics, it says that Hispanics are at an increased risk of hypertension and stroke. Sodium intake is significantly higher in Hispanic infants and toddlers. So within children in the Hispanic population, there's even a higher intake of sodium than is within the general population. So we must develop a healthy diet for children. We must develop healthy habits when we feed our children, the type of food we give our children. It says establish a salt preference early in life. Eating habits formed today will continue into adulthood. So whatever we teach our children now, it's not going to stop. It's going to go all the way. It's going to follow them all the way through into adulthood. It says in the U.S., nearly 80% of 1 through 3-year-olds and more than 90% in 4 through 18-year-olds in the U.S. get too much sodium. And a recent study found that many toddler foods have too much sodium. So a lot of this food and finger foods and little snacks that we like to give the children, it's either too high in sugar or way too high in salt. Kids who have high sodium diets are about 40% more likely to have elevated blood pressure as kids who have lower sodium diets. So again, as we stated, so all those kids that are eating this type of foods and are constantly fed this kind of food, they have a higher chance of kids that do not eat or partake of this kind of diet. And then it's sad to see oftentimes when we go to the supermarket, people that live in a poor area or are in a setting where they can afford better things, unfortunately, a lot of these foods that are high in sodium and bad for us are the cheapest food. So that's all they're able to afford, and that's what they buy. That's why we see a lot of diseases kind of rise, and we see a high percentage among this population. It's oftentimes it's not that they're purposely seeking this thing out, but because that's all they could afford. And here we see where we should be. The red line is 1,500 micrograms of sodium that we should consume a day. Milligrams of sodium that we should consume a day. So as we see in the American population, women on average take about 3,000, twice as much. So we should be at 1,500 milligrams. Women consume about 3,000, but if we look at men, it's even higher. Men consume about 4,200, almost 3 times as much of what we need. Sometimes when we go to restaurants and we have a meal, we just do one meal that we sit down and have at the restaurant might be at least 2,000 grams. So just in that one meal, we surpass what we need for the day. dietary sodium sources. So where does most of the sodium that we overconsume come from? As we see, it says 77% comes from processed foods or restaurant foods, as I stated. It says 12% is naturally occurring in the body. So 12% is natural in the body, which is fine. 6% is while we're eating. Oftentimes that we think, we see a salt shaker on the table, and we tell people, oh, don't use a salt shaker, it's bad for you, you don't want any high blood pressure. But in reality, only 6% it comes from that salt shaker. Most of it comes already from the food that's being prepared already. It says 5% from home cooking. So 5% of that salt comes from home cooking, 6% while we're eating, if we use a little bit of from the salt shaker, and 12% naturally occurring in the body. But 77% comes if we eat out in restaurants or if we buy processed foods. And to show that the advice was given to us even before the studies were made. If we read in the Review and Herald, November 6, 1883, Inspiration told us and warned us about it. She said, on my frequent journeys across the continent, I do not patronize restaurants, dining cars, or hotels for the simple reason that I cannot eat the food they're provided. The dishes are highly seasoned with salt and pepper, creating an almost intolerable thirst. They will irritate and inflame the delicate coating of the stomach. Such is the food that is commonly served upon fashionable tables and given to children. Its effect is to cause nervousness and to create thirst, which water does not quench. Food should be prepared in as simple a manner as possible, free from condiments and spices, even from undue amount of salt. So now we sit there, we're consuming this food, there's too much salt. So now, as a result of too much salt, we get what? Thirsty. So now we're not only eating too much salt, now we get thirsty, so now we're drinking while we eat. And then we go and suffer even more. Christian Temperance and Bible Hygiene, page 51, it says, the more liquid there is taken into the stomach with meals, the more difficult it is for food to digest. For the liquid must first be absorbed. Do not eat largely of salt. Give up spiced pickles. Keep fried food out of the stomach. Eat fruit with the meals, and the irritation that calls for so much drink will cease to exist. But if anything is needed to quench thirst, pure water is all that nature requires. Never take coffee, tea, beer, wine, or spirituous liquor. So see the end result? So we eat too much salt, and now we're thirsty, so now we gotta when we want to drink while we eat, and as a result, digestion is suffering, so one thing leads to the next. So why sodium reduction? As we stated and saw earlier, so in the food industry, it says, a study showed if the food industry voluntarily reduced sodium by 50% in the top 50 of the food they sell in restaurants, contributing to American sodium intake, and then reduce sodium by 10% in all other foods, this could result in 80% of Americans achieving intermediate sodium intake goals and 30% achieving ideal sodium intake. So if restaurants were to cut back 50% of the sodium they add to their foods, it says 80% of Americans would achieve intermediate sodium intake. So now we see the end result of going the other extreme. So we studied the good effect of salt, how good salt is for us if we take it in moderation. All the positive attributes it has upon our body, upon the creation that God has made. But then we also saw the end result if we go to one extreme of eating no salt or too low intake of salt. And then we see the other end result if we take too much salt, how the body could suffer. So as we do everything has to be done in moderation. So God's remedies, I didn't add too much because it's pretty straightforward. It's self-evident, very simple. As we stated, moderation. And for those that might possibly want to try other kind of salt from the regular salt that we find at the supermarket, there's other kinds of salt that we could use. The most common that we know is sea salt. It says most people are very familiar with sea salt. This salt comes from where? As we guessed it, the ocean. and undergoes an evaporation process to separate the salt from the water. Sea salt contains a small amount of natural iodine. So while with the table salt that we get, they have to add iodine to it. Sea salt naturally has a small amount of iodine already in it. Although not nearly as much as iodized salt, it is typically much less refined than table salt, and it comes both fine and coarse varieties. But there is a little warning now with sea salt. Not that the sea salt was bad on its own, but because we as human beings have this, overconsuming certain things, we have destroyed our environment. And oftentimes we dump too much plastic into the ocean. So he says, while sea salts are a great unrefined choice, unfortunately, pollution is steadily becoming a concern. Whereas ancient seas were ocean clean, we have solid ocean coastlines with pollutants like microplastics. While this is no means a reason to give up sea salt, microplastics have infiltrated nearly everything. It's good to keep yourself in the know and balance your sea salt consumption with other earthbound salts. So we should not only depend solely just on sea salt, but have a balance. Because unfortunately, as we destroy this planet and pollute this planet, it also affects all those natural things that we need. So it's not only affecting the environment and nature, affecting the animals, but it also affects us. Another salt that is very common now and very famous now and well known is Himalayan pink salt. I know some years ago it wasn't that well known, but now it's come to the forefront, and a lot of people are aware of it. So now because it's become so famous, it's easier to get. It says, these salts come from Asian seabeds in the Himalayan mountains. Their pink color comes from the rich iron content. This salt is, in fact, quite rich in minerals, containing all 84 essential trace elements required for your body. Pink salt can assist in many bodily functions, such as reducing muscle cramps, promoting blood sugar health, and promoting healthy pH in your cells. Many experts recommend pink salt as one of the healthiest salts you can consume. Its popularity has made it more affordable than other more exotic salts on the market. So it's not as expensive as it used to be because it's becoming more and more common. Another one that I never heard of before I started doing research was called black salt. Since black salt originating from Hawaii, black lava salt is unrefined. Its black color is due to its content of activated charcoal, and we know that charcoal is good to clean out impurities, which is great for digestion and removing impurities in the body. So maybe not use it so much for your cooking and for your eating purposes, but maybe use it from time to time just to get rid of toxins from the body. And some salt alternatives, we still need salt, but for those that might feel like they need a little more taste in their food, there's other things that we could use, rather than salt to add that extra flavor. I know that I often see Sister Michelle with the kelp granules, so that's a very good thing to use. It says, Maine Coast kelp granules is a salt alternative made from just one ingredient, organic raw kelp. So these kelp granules deliver iodine similar to iodized salt. So if you don't want to use iodized salt, you could use this as an option, but without as much sodium. Reviewers are reporting that this product adds a nice flavor to dishes, doesn't taste fishy, and is very versatile. Another thing is nutritional yeast. It says nutritional yeast seasoning is highly nutritious. For example, just 1 tablespoon of Bragg nutritional yeast seasoning has 3 grams of protein, 1 gram of fiber, and pretty impressive amounts of vitamin B2, B6, B1, and B12, which, oftentimes, an attack upon vegetarians and those that are vegans, oh, you're lacking B12, how you get your B12, this is not a good idea to be vegetarian or vegan because, you're going to lack this and that. But nature and plant-based items provide that B12 that we need, such as nutritional yeast. It also has thiamine and zinc. It is also gluten-free, salt-free, and for those that eat kosher food, it's kosher. Reviewers are saying that this product is tasty, healthy, and a great way to add vitamins into your meals. So that's our presentation for this morning. But the most important thing we got to remember is everything in moderation, but much more important than the physical salt. Remember, as we read in the beginning, God called us to be that spiritual salt of the earth. So let us go forward and let us be the salt of the earth. Let us go and teach others, admonish others, not only about the health message, but also about the three angels message and this last great message for the last days, which is the three angels message. So may the Lord bless you this morning. May he keep you, and may you hold on to his promises. I'm going to ask Pastor Walker to come forward and close with prayer at this time.
This was a wonderful message we had this morning, Helen. And, as I listened to you, Elder Hector, I've learned something very important there from the spiritual and the natural. Because if you use salt in a immoderate way, it will affect you. Even though it's good. Likewise, spiritually, the Lord said we are to be the salt of the earth. And if we are not really having that salt, which really Christ is the one supposed to produce that kind of spiritual salt in us, we cannot truly salt with others or help others. So we need to learn the physical and the spiritual. As we apply them, we can be better Christians and help men and women out there in the world. May the Lord bless you all. Let us pray. Father in heaven, again we come before you in the name of Jesus. Father, we thank you this morning for the presentation. As you said, Lord, we are to be the salt of the earth, and as we receive the blessing that we can receive by doing that which is moderate, eating salt moderately, it will help us physically. Spiritually, Lord, we need that salt in our life, that we can be the people that you wanted us to be. Bless us and keep us. Bless the food we're about to partake. Dismiss us now with your blessing, we ask. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.